Hello and welcome to this session of ExecuNet Masterclass. I'm your host, Tony Vlahos, and my guest this hour is the Global Practice Leader of Execution for Franklin Covey, Mr. Chris McChesney. So the number one challenge facing corporate leaders ahead of innovation, geopolitical instability, and top-line growth is executional excellence. It is really hard, right, to implement our plans for achieving our wildly important goals. Well, today you'll learn a simple, repeatable, and proven formula for translating a strategy into awesome results without falling into the crisis management trap. Really important stuff, and part of our commitment here at ExecuNet to connect you with trusted advice that can transform your career, how you work and lead, and the way you live. With that, Chris, it is such a pleasure to welcome you to the ExecuNet stage. They are all yours.
Thank you so much, Tony. I am delighted to be here. Such an amazing association and organization that you're all part of. So I'm just honored to be here. So I'm going to dive in, and we're probably going to go at a pretty good clip. We'll try and share with you everything we've learned about execution in 15 years in about 45 minutes. So we're gonna move right along, and I'm going to start kind of the way we started. Originally, we were asked, the leadership team at Franklin Covey was asked two questions by a gentleman named Ram Charan. You may know that name. Very influential Harvard business professor. And his first question, he said, Franklin Covey, with all your experience in developing leaders, what do leaders struggle with more? Do they struggle more with strategy, or do they struggle more with execution? And you can imagine we said execution. Most of you are probably saying execution as well. That's what he knew we'd say that. His next question got us. His next question was, what are leaders educated in? If you go to business school, if you take a business class, what are you going to learn? Do you learn execution, or do you learn strategy and business planning? And that, for whatever reason, that moment in time really began something for us where we really wanted to understand what were the root principles behind this dilemma that everyone's frustrated with, but really aren't that educated in. So the very first thing I want you to think about, and you don't just have to think about this, you can do this, but if you look at all of the things that you're currently working on to improve your life, your team, your organization, if you have organizational responsibilities, they all fall neatly, more or less, into two categories. And this is, we find a very helpful distinction to begin thinking about execution. The one category, stroke of the pen, is exactly like it sounds. It's anything you can do because you have the authority, right? You have the money. It may take brains and guts and maybe a little consensus building, but it's going to happen because you said so, right? Big consequences often associated with these things, and they could be, right? They could be small, do we hire that person or not? They could be big, if there's a new line of business, do we want to go into that? And I think people that have never had, and this is just a theory, but I think people that have never had leadership positions would tend to think this is what being a leader is. And then when you get in charge, you realize there's a whole bunch on this other side, right? Right? That no one's really listening to me. And there are these other components that require a change in behavior, or worse, a change in habit. And these are the things, I'll tell you maybe the best way to think about it. These are the things that you can't get done with a memo. And it doesn't matter that you're the boss. These are things that require not just compliance, but they require commitment. And I'm going to go ahead and say this. We believe, and we saw this very early on, that with very few exceptions, the hardest thing a leader will do is drive a strategy or a plan that requires a significant change in people's behavior, or, right, a high degree of engagement. And I want you to just think about that for a second, right? Is most leaders are going to hit this wall. And one of the things ways we've expressed this, we find that people resonate with it very quickly. They get this idea. We had a chief engineer, one of the top 50 developers of the Lockheed Martin Joint Strike Fighter, right? One of the most complex projects in the history of the world. And he sort of nailed this idea. He said, harder than getting another 5 pounds out of the landing gear assembly, right? It was all about reducing weight. Was doing anything that required a significant change on the part of the engineers. That everything else could be figured out, but this felt like voodoo. So we recognize there's this rub, but most leaders, and I'll put myself in this category as well, we don't tend to think, I wish I was better at this, right? It was not this, I wish I was better at driving a strategy that required a change in people's day. What we tend to think is, I wish I didn't have Tony, Mark, and Sue on my team, right? Every leader hits this wall, and immediately you tend to think, well, you tend to blame the people, because, and why not, right? They're the ones not doing it. Who would you like me to blame?